only thing we own is credibility. So we're almost a credibility shop. So anything, we have very strict ethics and guidelines about how we do interviews, if we go on trips, who pays for what, under what auspices, and as well as anything illegal, obviously, what happened news of the world, that would be illegal for a US company because it violates the Corrupt Foreign Actresses Act. So I haven't seen that change. We haven't done anything specific in CNN because we already have strong ethical guidelines.
More emphasis put on it, for example?
No, it just, you know, it's kind of like the media, the blanket statement is, to me, it's like politicians, right? I mean, there are a lot of corrupt politicians, a lot of good politicians. And obviously there's the print media, there's the electronic media, and then within the print media you have the rags like the Sun and the Daily Mail, and then you have the Guardian, the Independent, New York Times. So you can't really lump all of those together. I don't think for us I've seen any change, nor has the New York Times. It makes you aware of it. You know, it's kind of like being an ethical banker. You know, everyone just kind of gives you a hard time even though you're still doing good things. So.
I would say the first thing I would suggest is be flexible and go into it with the understanding that what you start out with doesn't have to be what you end up with, and that when you're co-creating a type of program like this, where you've got representatives from a variety of different universities with a variety of different needs and output that they need to get out of a program, you have to have the type of flexibility to adapt to what those needs are. And I would say that a lot of times what Rock did was allow itself to evolve and to not get bogged down in the initial framework creation. You know, I think it's especially with partnerships, it's very easy to say, okay, the first step is we have to create some guidelines and we've got to create the platform. And instead of letting the process create the platform. And so I would say flexibility and respond to changes quickly are probably the core things that Random Acts of Kindness did that allowed it to become what it is today. I think you just have to do it. I mean, there's a certain element of just fearlessness that you throw caution to the wind in some sense and just say, you know what, we're going to do it. And you know, that's that saying the first, you know, jumping off a cliff, it's that first step that's the hardest. And I think for something like this, you just have to start trying and see what sticks.
Yeah, I would add, just kind of on this, is you want to experiment, because you don't want to define up front the platform like they was saying, and then not be flexible enough to adapt, because whatever you come up with in the first place is not going to be right. Everyone's all about disruptive innovation. Oh, let's just be disruptive. Well, to be disruptive, you have to be very, very, very iterative. And that's what people forget. It's like, come up with something, just try it, get it out there, and then iterate immediately and engage as many people in that as possible, like a democracy. And if you figure out a way to do that well, where you don't implode on yourself, you will then innovate. You will then move beyond the original idea that you had, because whatever you start with will not be the right solution, I promise you. But if you stop there, you'll never get to the final solution. You have to start with something, get it out there, and then just rapidly prototype.
And I think also, you know, I know that you all have been going through some organizational changes, and I think that when you get that initial group together and start trying to figure out what the platform is going to look like, having a very horizontal structure is going to be very important initially, and to not sort of bring in the baggage of institutional hierarchy when you're trying to create whatever it is that ends up happening.
Yeah, I mean, so can I keep going? So I love what she just said, because we have this mentality with organizations that they have to be based in the industrial age hierarchy way of things, of doing things. Like we have to be have an org chart and be a cog in a big wheel to produce something. It's all about efficiency and outcomes. And you need to think when I look at your organization, you have a huge opportunity to be the organization that really adopts an information age way of thinking about MBA education just in general. The whole education landscape is completely changing. You could really question whether we'll have buildings like this and meet on campuses in 10 years. Is that really necessary anymore? And so there's all these questions about how education is going to happen. And I'm not saying you guys have to solve them, but you can definitely be at the forefront of, how we rethink MBA education going forward.
How do we keep the community communicating with each other? And for the longest time, we tried very much to jam a certain platform down everybody's throat. You will use this to communicate. And what we eventually decided to do was to go where the people are. And from a platform standpoint, if what you've created doesn't work, every one of you is using a new media technology to communicate every day, whether it be Twitter, Facebook, Google Groups, Google Docs, Skype. Feel free to use what it is you use in your daily practice, because if you don't use it every day, you're not going to use it on a regular basis.
But I would say that I think there are a couple of points there. I think social media with all this information, people still want to go somewhere. Is it really true, right? And that's what, on the social media side, that's what you still have to, as a consumer, go, well, I hear so-and-so died, let me just check with CNN. Oh yes, it's not true, he's not dead yet, or it's true. I think that's one kind of level. But also I think what you say is, it's a bit of a challenge in many ways for news organizations when we actually start to tell news in a different way, because with not so much social media, but with all the devices, the internet, iPads, cell phones, people know what the story is before they tune to us. The old days, we opened the broadcast, this bomb went off here, so many people died. People know that already. So now you have a challenge as a media organization to stay in the game. What happened in the US is that after 9/11, Fox took a political stance, as you said, and went to the right. MSNBC took the reverse and went to the left in the US. And it left us with a big challenge to try and stay in the middle. We'd try, at least in the US, try not to take a political standpoint. It means we lost a lot of viewerships, because when a nation like the US went through huge crisis, people kind of had an opinion, so they wanted almost to reinforce what you heard. Our challenge has been, how do you kind of try and stay neutral? But our answer is, we have to change our storytelling. We have to change how we tell stories. If you watch CNN compared to the BBC and others, they have a very classic old-fashioned style, where you'll have, if you chart it out like we do in the industry, you'll have some opening pictures, interview an expert, some more pictures, then the reporter standing on a street somewhere still, some more pictures, another expert, and some pictures closed. That's a kind of a bog standard package. What we try to do is, now as an audience, you already know what's happened. So our challenge is, what can we add to that? What we can add is why it happened, maybe, or what does it feel like as a reporter to be on the scene? So you'll find a lot more of our reporters will try and bring the audience in and try and have the audience experience what it is like at an event, rather than standing here. You say, look around me. This is when I came in. So it's not editorializing, but it's kind of explaining in a different way. It's telling a story in a different way. I think that's what you will see us doing a lot more, because I think that will be our response to that challenge. People already know it. So instead of taking a viewpoint and going like this, can you do compelling, interesting stories in a different way? And I think that is what social media is a big challenge to us. Not just social media, but cell phones and the web and the speed of information. So. News, there's certain, the way I divide up, there's certain various news events. There's obviously breaking news. Now you cover that, that's pretty standard. You have to cover it as a credible news organization, or a political scandal, or something else. But then there are the stories that you've only got so much time and you've only got so many resources. What story do you cover? For us as a 24-hour news network, it's not so much as what stories don't we, or what do we leave out. We run a business, we've got so much money, and we say, what stories can we cover? Is this a good story? That is the difficult decision, and it's not done on ideological, it's done on what will people be interested in? What this story, because I get it so much, I get people, especially in Johannesburg, calling me up and say, hey, it's Vanessa, did you get my email? I said, well, about what? She goes, oh, about the dentist conference in Bloemfontein. Are you covering it? I mean, I'm doing a news program for a global audience. Why would a dentist conference be of interest to anyone who didn't have a sore tooth or who wasn't a dentist, right? And how will I, as a TV network, how am I going to cover that? That's with a lot of conferences, a lot of summits to us. It's a great print story. Often we don't cover things because it's just a bunch of guys in suits at a table. That's not compelling television. The stories behind it, back to what I may talk about tomorrow, is what sells as a story. It has to be a human aspect to it, because we are really, when you look at it, we are people telling other people's stories to people. And so it has to have that element in it. So I don't know that.
We've set our team up at NASA as kind of internal consultants, because what we saw was that we have this very industrial age way of doing business. It's a big hierarchy. And the way we tell a story at NASA is frustratingly constrained. We have a communications organization that tells the stories that we think the public will find interesting. And it's frustrating to me because, did you guys all fly into the airport? Did you guys fly in? Did you see that big sign that says, are you going to be, it's a BlackBerry ad, it says, will you be the passengers or will you be the pilot? And see, it frustrates me because so many people are just the passengers in life. And so when people are looking at the news, what news does CNN cover? It's the news that the majority of people just kind of want to hear, because why do we care about Oscar? I really could care less. It doesn't matter. That's not changing the world. And so at NASA, we're trying to tell these stories, and it's so funneled. Everything is so funneled. And so I've taken the position at NASA to set up an organization that gives people the freedom to tell the stories. There's 20,000 people that work at NASA. Every one of them has a compelling story. But our official mechanism, we don't have enough time to tell those stories. But they can tell those stories to their communities. And that's the analogy here to you guys is every one of you has influence in your own communities, and you can go back and you can take what you've done here and you can influence those communities. You don't have to have one central communication channel. You can leverage social media. You can leverage your personal networks to get the story out about what you're trying to do, and it's essentially a mass collaboration. I mean, your platform is you, really, and then you're using technology to scale that. And so I get really frustrated with the whole censorship argument, because it's very backwards. There's really no need for censorship today when everyone can tell the story. And maybe we all don't need to hear the same stories. I think we should hear the true story and be able to find the facts. But we should be able to tap into technology to get to that. So it's kind of a ramble. I apologize. But I think the whole discussion is really, really interesting, because as an organization, how do we get beyond just kind of chasing the shiny object all the time and being the passenger on the plane? How do we as leaders actually influence others to promote what you're trying to do with your organization? I mean, that's your objective here. Your objective is to lead other people in your roles, whether it's with this organization or wherever you go.
And I think just to build off that, with the example of Random Hacks of Kindness, and we found the same with many of the other projects that we work on where we've got competing interests. And one of the things that we found very beneficial is once we've established the shared understanding and points of collaboration, you then are faced with the task of going back to your parent organizations and getting their buy-in. And I know Nick had the experience with NASA. Why is rock important to NASA? And oftentimes, I've seen that once the individual has the buy-in, you'll go back and, I mean, you're some of the best business students ever. You can sell anything. And so it's just a matter of understanding how you can package the collaboration to make it palatable to the organization. And that's oftentimes sort of part of the challenge of being a change maker, is once you understand what your direction is, how do you get the buy-in, and how do you change it and translate it into a language that your organization will understand? And I think that's the challenge with a lot of the universities, is how do we convince them that this is a program they need to participate in and that they need to invest in. And I think it's sort of a standard, know what your needs are and know what their needs are and find those points of commonality.
When we first started, there was a lot of skepticism about just, the potential of the platform to address the challenges that we had. We saw a lot of the first round, we had a lot of solutions that were useful. One of them, for example, was we have Cassini mission data from Saturn from back in the day, the 1960s or 70s. All the data was kept in a format called VICAR, V-I-C-A-R. It's a format that NASA developed in 1967. No one uses it anymore. It's really, the data is kind of not useful. So one of the solutions was actually to translate that old data into a new format so people can make new videos and photos of the mission. And so things like that are really easy wins for NASA. And so we've seen a lot of adoption of the original ones, but I would like to see more mission relevant adoptions, meaning we don't want this just to be on the peripheral of the organization. We want this to be a core way that NASA does business. And so when we think about one of the big things that is on everyone's minds right now is asteroids and asteroid exploration. And we had that big meteorite that came through Russia the other day, which made a lot of news. And so a lot of people are interested in what's NASA doing in terms of asteroid exploration. So when we set up new programs, we're standing up stuff right now, we should think about, as part of that, not just hiring a contractor to do work. We should think about mass collaboration as a way to engage people in solving those challenges, because honestly, there's a lot of things that we could do that way that we would never have thought about before. So in conclusion, this next batch of challenges that we're going to offer are very mission relevant. They all have customers on the inside of NASA. And then when we're actually working with SecMuse is our contractor and our operations lead on this project, they're going to be working with us to essentially, on the back end, what's the proper word? Accelerate. It's not. Accelerate. So we're really interested in how you go to a hackathon event and there's solutions that are developed. How do we actually get organizations to adopt those more? This is something we're really, really interested in right now. So we're thinking about this big long process on the back end of it called acceleration. How do we take an idea or a prototype and then accelerate it to turn it into a business or adopt it in an organization? That's what we're doing right now with the second round. So. Open source, period. If everything we do, and now we're a government agency, so we have a little bit more flexibility because we really are trying to change the world versus just make money. So we essentially put an open source license on it, and then we can use it and anybody else can use it. And it really takes care of all the IP issues. There's a lot of patent law and things like that in organizations. I would argue that that's a really bad way of looking at the world. It's a very closed view. And as soon as you start going down patent law and IP and all of that, you essentially close off your opportunities for collaboration. And so we try to get around all of that just by making it open from the very beginning. So yeah, that's how we do it. Yeah. And it's for rock, for space apps, for National Day of Civic Hacking. Everything we've done is open source.
All of the platforms and tools processes, documentation, it's all free. So you can, if you want to start something like Random Hacks of Kindness in your company or your community, you can take everything you want from us, slap your logo on it, and we don't care.
This is where most people get hackathons wrong. You place too much value on the solutions that are the outcomes of the event themselves versus the process of the event. What's really compelling about these things are that we have organizations coming together that would never sit at the same table and doing things that they could never do alone. And what came out of the event was helpful, and it might benefit a lot of people, and that's why we give it away. But what's really interesting is the next conversation that we're going to have and the next iteration of what ROC looks like. And so we don't place a large value on solutions. Now, this is something we talk about all day long with our stakeholders. They're like, how much is that app worth? I don't know, you figure it out. Take the app, go make money. What we're really interested in is what can we do together as organizations?
So specifically with the technology companies, you know, everyone who participates in these programs has the day job where they're doing their job, right? So they're developing products for their company, they're building things. And from a value add standpoint, participating in these projects, working on challenges for NASA, working on a project for a local food bank, what this does for the employees is it gets them thinking in a different way. It exposes them to other perspectives that they can then translate into doing their job better, right? So if I'm an employee from XYZ tech company and I go participate at a Random Hacks of Kindness event or a Space Apps Challenge or National Day of Civic Hacking, what I create is just sort of, it's the same as a community's CSR program, right, where you go plant trees. But what it does is it allows the employees to use their core skill set in a way that's completely innovative and creative, and it has them approaching their skill set from a different direction. And a lot of times that translates into better work on their back end. I mean, you look at Google's 10% rule, right, where they give their employees 8 hours a day or 8 hours a week to work on whatever they want. Some of the coolest stuff from Google in the last 5 years has come out of that free experimentation process. And so what programs like Random Hacks of Kindness do is it allows companies to do that, but they're also contributing to societal good.
And if I might philosophize just a bit, I mean, what is the future of work? I mean, is it going to work if you show up and you work for AT&T, you make phones or whatever? You show up, you sit at a desk, a cubicle for 8 hours a day, 8 to 5, take a lunch. I would argue that that is a really outmoded way of working. And the world is changing. I mean, you have a lot more people teleworking now, and people don't necessarily even, there's a lot more maybe consultants, people that are working for multiple organizations. And so I think what something like ROC shows is that there's a lot of people that if I could hire anybody in here to work at NASA, would anybody be interested in taking a job at NASA? I'm sure there's one or two of you that would be interested. But the question is, maybe you live in Cape Town and right now you don't want to move to Kennedy Space Center in Florida. But we don't need to do that anymore. Maybe I could hire you for 10 hours a week, or maybe you could just do a project, or maybe we could just collaborate, and then if we can monetize it afterwards, we just rethink the whole thing about how we make money. And so I think there's a lot to be said in how we think about the way we work in the future, and it's changing. And that's really important, especially when you think about like an MBA education. I mean, we don't want to train people to think about the way things have been done for the past 50 years. We want to think about the way things are going to be done in the next 50 years. Like you were saying, we don't know what social media platforms are going to be around in 10 years. Hopefully, I'm hopeful that it's going to completely change. I don't want to say Facebook and Twitter and everybody will be out of business. I just hope that there's a much more rapid iteration of whatever those platforms are, and then organizations can take advantage of those.
It would be disingenuous for me to say that, you know, it's all this free form, spontaneous creation. You know, to be disruptive, there's quite a lot of of background research that has to go on. And for random acts of kindness, like Nick said, we're going into a completely unknown change in the next year. And it's responding to both challenges within our own organization and looking at the greater trend of the market. So there's quite a bit of critical thinking that goes into every phase. I mean, the reflection process on both where things are now, where they're going, where they have been, that has to be a constant process. So for instance, with Random Hacks of Kindness, we've got this great tried and true method, right? We've got the hackathon, we can throw great events, get everybody excited, but we had to take a critical look at what is the true impact on the ground. And although the impact isn't the only reason for the partnership, it's a huge motivation for many of the corporate entities that are involved. And so we've had to come up with a completely new strategy and a new vision of what Random Hacks of Kindness will be in 2013 and then following in 2014. And it's very much based on how open source communities have traditionally grown, how corporations grow, and what we would like to have the future of those projects look like. And for Random Hacks of Kindness, it's very exciting because what we started out with was almost a hierarchy of big organizations coming together, creating a strategy, and then dispersing it out to the community who are actually the implementers. And a point of innovation that we're going to have now is actually strategically passing off much of the leadership to the community and having actual grassroots, local level leadership that trickles up versus trickling down. And so the things that are going to be happening with Random Hacks of Kindness from a global movement standpoint, that swap in power dynamics is going to be an experiment.
And then the focus of the core partners going forward will be to leverage their resources to take the good ideas that come out and really accelerate them going forward.
Obviously, we have to keep looking at them and changing, such as, we have the traditional standard and practices units about ethics and the usual old classic journalism, but then we've had to, in order to keep that core principle, we have to keep adding on new policies, especially with social media. Turns into a bit of a challenge for us, because take something like Twitter, which is hugely possible. Now, if a CNN correspondent says something on Twitter, that is not in their personal capacity if they work for us, if they are a known personality. So we have to obviously incorporate new policies on what they can say and what they can't say, to incorporate so that they're aware what you can say on social media so you don't get into trouble. But basically, it still goes back to the same principle. We tell people, at least with Twitter and Facebook, if it's in a work capacity, is don't say anything you wouldn't say on the air in CNN. So you can actually simplify it. But there have been a number of cases where people, maybe have a glass too much of wine and they shoot something off on Twitter. And then there was a classic case about, I think it was ITN or BBC. One reporter was upset that his boss wouldn't run his story, so one late night he sent off the guy's a reel. He used some colorful language, and he actually sent it out on Twitter, and a couple of million people read it, including his boss and everyone he worked for. So I'd be careful with that.
So for us, it comes down to relationships and trust. From the Rock standpoint, we really do our best to have the kind of open communication where if someone begins to stray from our core values, there's gut checks at every step, and really critical thinking about why it is we're doing what we're doing, and having the honesty and trust to be able to tell someone what you're doing conflicts with our goals. From a Second Muse standpoint, we've actually taken that onto a whole level of perfectionism. We have a program, an algorithm that we run all of our projects through that factors in things like profit, but also learning, contribution to society, shared knowledge. And so when we get a new contract, we'll put it through this a program called Lodestone that will actually tell us if it matches our core values. And we won't take a project if it conflicts with our core values. And conversely, if something is going to provide us with a huge amount of learning or have a huge contribution to society, but the profit isn't there, there's some leeway there, so we can actually devote a lot of our attention to innovation without just being completely driven by profit, although that is a factor.
Final words?
Yeah, I was gonna say, this is a hard question. I mean, this is like a 5-hour discussion that we could have later. And I mean, I think this is something that's really difficult for organizations as they grow, because you can start with values, but like if those aren't, well, I should say start with values, because I would argue some organizations don't even start with values, but as you grow, how do you communicate and instill those values in the others that join your organization? That's a really difficult question. I mean, clear, consistent communication and make sure that you hire people of value that share the common values. Because if you bring someone on board that just is completely opposite, I mean, you're just gonna have conflict from the very beginning. Not to say the conflict's bad necessarily, but it's a really hard question. So I don't know. We'll talk later.